be here and to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for 46 years of studying Tesla's life. The thing that I found out the most about him is that you never stop learning. He continues to teach you. So I'm going to let the slides drive a lot of this lecture. Okay, the next slide. Oh, I can. I like to start out my lectures with coming attractions. So I have a new book coming out called Ozone Therapy for the Treatment of Viruses, the Science and Promise of Healing with Ozone. And one of the reasons I have this book is because of Nikola Tesla. In fact, it's the only reason that I wrote the book. I wrote it with 4 medical doctors. Tesla in 1896, that's his patent for an ozone generator. And you can see he sold oils embedded with ozone. I won't get into it today, but ozone therapy is a good way to kill viruses, which means it's a good way to kill the COVID virus. And there are a number of, there are 2 in particular ozone therapists here in New York City that have helped cure over 100 different COVID patients. Okay. This was a photo taken of this guy in California, and he resembles Tesla. These are the 2 books that I've written. The first one on the left, Lifetimes of Nikola Tesla, was published in 1996. It's still in print. And the new one is Tesla, Was It at War? What I tried to do, and the reason why I wrote the first book, was I read John O'Neill's book, Prodigal Genius, which is a brilliant book, one of the best books I've ever read. But there were gaps in the stories. The 2 major gaps for me was, number 1 was, why did he fail at Wardenclyffe? And number 2, there were sections in his life that are just missing from the story. So I went back and researched his life and created a strict chronology. I have to thank Leland Anderson and John Ratzlaff, 2 forefathers of mine. You know, I stand on their shoulders because they did a tremendous amount of research, which enabled me to get a lot of papers, articles covering 50 years of Tesla's life. And so I pieced together all of his life in these 2 books. The first book, Lifetimes of Nikola Tesla, was called Revelatory by Publishers Weekly. And frankly it was. There were some moments where I really had some brilliant insights into Tesla's life. And we'll cover a couple of those. And Scientific American called it Serious Scholarship. The guy who wrote the article in Scientific American had written his doctoral dissertation on Charles Steinmetz. And Steinmetz was a kind of an enemy of Tesla's, so the article is a bit critical. My brother called me, he said, did you see? He's very critical. I said, look, he called it serious scholarship. I don't care what else he said, that's fine with me. So Scientific American has praised the book, actually. And the New York Times had a full-page article on the book. So this was 1996. Tesla was basically very obscure until Elon Musk came along, but I think my book started to play a role because there was a lot of people denigrating Tesla's life and what he achieved, and I made sure I had footnotes for every single statement that I made, so I think it played a huge role in changing the outlook. This is a home that we grew up in the early 1950s. That's my family at the bottom, my father and mother, and my brother and my sister. And this is our house in West Hempstead right before it was completed. And in the 1950s, we would go swimming in Wading River. Our dentist and his wife was a family friend of my mother's, would invite us every summer, and we'd go swimming there. My sister's here today, and this is my sister, and my grandmother, my mother. Very recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, I discovered that Tesla had a house. on Long Island Sound. That house, from that house, you can see this beach. So for many years, we would go right by Wardenclyffe. I had no idea that Wardenclyffe existed. But that's how amazing, my life was, how linked to Tesla. My father was a TV repairman. This is his logo and the drawing that he had, at that time. And I used to go out with him, and he would put aerials up on the, on the roofs of the buildings. And he had televisions in different stages of development. He built them from scratch. So when we were a kid, when I was a kid, he was in the Navy, and he taught electronics, and my mother took a course with him, and she fell in love, and that's what happened. So I joined the Boy Scouts, and one of the possible things that you could build was a crystal radio set. So my dad helped me build a crystal radio set. And what it was it was a jar, and you wrapped wire around the jar, and you used acid to eat away some of the insulation. And I took a can, and had that can was the dial, and it had a crystal which picked up the ambient radio waves and translated into, that you could download and hear information. And it had earphones and a wire that went out the second story of the house that I lived in. And it's all hooked up, and it doesn't work. And my father goes, I can't figure this out. And then he goes, I got it. He took another wire and attached it to the radiator, and all of a sudden it worked. And I listened to Muhammad Ali's First Fight with Sonny Liston on my little crystal radio set. There was no plug. It took all the information from the airwaves. Now, what was interesting to me, and I asked this fellow, when we were watching all of his gadgets, about the ground connection. I felt that why did it work why did it not work when I had an aerial out the way, but it worked when I had the ground connection? And I thought that there was a connection through the ground, from the ground all the way to the radio station, which is about 15 miles away. Tesla, of course, is very interested in ground waves, and I think that the ground connection, we need to have a better understanding what the real reason for the ground connection is. So here's the crystal radio set, and you can see the tube with a wire wrapped around it. This is a photo I took off the internet, but mine looked very much like this. And if you have kids, I think you should build them with the kids. I mean, they're really magical. And my idea here was, here you see the airwave, and here's the ground connection, some type of circuit. And Tesla was saying, basically, that the radio evolved in the wrong way. We sent it all out through the air, and we should have be sending it through the earth. It was much more efficient. So I had never heard of Tesla's name. I was teaching courses in parapsychology, and my friend Howard Smuckler was teaching courses on UFOs. And he was teaching in New York and also in Rhode Island. And he came back as the editor-in-chief of ESP magazine and Ancient Astronauts magazine. And I got interested in this Tibetan Lama by the name of Lobsang Rampa. First book I read of his was called The Third Eye. And he did not look Tibetan to me, and I wondered about it. And I think it's an autobiography of a psychic kid who grows up in Tibet, and he's working for the Dalai Lama. He can see people's auras, and he can tell whether or not they're good people or bad people, so he was helping protect the Dalai Lama. So then I read the second book, Doctor from Lhasa. He's a doctor in China. He gets a medical degree. And then I read the third book, and in the third book, you find out that the real Lobsang Rampa is no longer alive. And Cyril Hoskins, who's a British plumber, is this guy, and that they traded souls. Cyril Hoskins was depressed because of World War II and wanted to die. Rampa wanted to live. So they went up into the astral plane, and Hoskins went on to the great beyond, and Rampa took over his body and wrote these 15 books. It's a crazy, wild, ridiculous story, but that's the story. The first book sold 150,000 copies. I'm telling you, it's a really good book, and there's a lot of very interesting information about higher states of consciousness. So I went down to New York, and this is Howard and his daughter Maya. She teaches at the new school now, and they're the UFOs. He was teaching a course on UFOs. And these were the magazines that he had. That's Uri Geller on your right. So I went down to New York to write an article, and I found a book about avatars, which are enlightened beings. One was Rampa, one was Jesus Christ, and one was this guy. His name was Nikola Tesla, and he was born on the planet Venus. He was raised by Earth parents in the mountains of Croatia, and he came to the Earth to give us fluorescent and neon lights, remote control, wireless communication, robots, fluorescent and neon lights. And I thought the Rampa story was crazy, but this is ridiculous. Because if this guy had lived, I certainly would have known about him. My father taught electrical engineering. He fixed televisions. So I'm in the library, New York Public Library, and I find an article that he wrote on high-frequency phenomena, and I come back. And Howard gives me two books. One is Prodigal Genius. It's a great biography about Tesla from a guy who knew Tesla for 40 years. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning author for the Herald Tribune. And the other was The Wall of Light, Nikola Tesla and the Venusian Spaceship, which said that Tesla was still alive, living on a UFO. He'd be like 130 years old, flying around and landing in this guy's backyard, Arthur Matthews in Canada. That's how I got introduced to Tesla. This is a Tesla scope, supposedly, that Matthews had where he spoke to extraterrestrials. So, Andrea Buharich is on the right. He brought Uri Geller to the United States. How many of you know who Uri Geller is? How many of you don't know who he is? He's an Israeli psychic who bends metals. He's been studied by SRI, Stanford Research Institute. The CIA studied him. He's a good friend with Ben Netanyahu. He's a super psychic. And Dr. Buharich is a medical doctor, and he brought Geller to the United States. He had just gone up to visit Arthur Matthews to find out whether Matthews really had a Tesla scope. So we went and we interviewed Andrea Buharich. Here is the book called Return of the Dove by Margaret Storm. This book is a biography of Tesla, which suggests that Tesla was indeed an extraterrestrial. He landed on the Earth, and she's the one who wrote the book about the avatars. This book was morphed into The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is written by Nicholas Rowe, the movie. And David Bowie plays the extraterrestrial in the movie, but it's really a takeoff of Tesla's life. So I'm in this wild world of all, extraterrestrials and UFOs and Lapsang Rampa. And I see that his book of patents is for sale at a UFO organization. It's 1,000 pages. And I get the money up and I buy the book, and I'm looking at 100 of these patents of electrical engineering, wireless communication, motors, on and on and on. And I'm going, wow, these patents are real. This guy is the real deal. The book was published by the Tesla Museum. It had his lectures and his articles. And I now knew I was sitting on a huge story. This was 1976. I figured that if indeed Tesla really was the inventor of the hydroelectric power system, really was wireless communication and remote control, no one had heard about this guy. I have to find out, did he really invent all these things? So I went into the heart and soul of each of these inventions, and again, I logged everything in the book Wizard, and established that indeed he really is the primary inventor of all of these things. And the reason he got attached to the UFO thing is because he, at one point, felt that he had received pulse frequencies from outer space, and he thought that he had perhaps from Mars. Mars, supposedly intelligent life on Mars. So the UFO crowd attached themselves. So when Tesla's name disappeared in the mainstream, the UFO people resurrected it, and this myth was created that he was born from another planet. I got another book on Tesla, and this was one of the first photos I ever saw of Tesla. And I was really hit by, it just resonated with me. I saw this photo, and I just knew that I was onto some huge story. And it turns out that this is a double exposure, because if Tesla was actually sitting at this moment, he would be electrified. So Tesla was into camp. He was into special effects photography. This picture was taken in Colorado Springs in 1899. These are, 60-foot lightning bolts. He also has laser light beams. And he's experimenting with wireless communication, sending impulses around the world in the late 1890s. So this was the first article I wrote. I wrote it for Ancient Astronauts. And it's called Nikola Tesla, the Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. The author is Harry Imber. That's my grandfather. I wrote it under a pseudonym. Tesla was also friends with John Hayes Hammond, who was involved in remote control. And this is the Hammond Castle. It's in Gloucester, Massachusetts. I highly recommend you go there. Tesla and Hammond formed a partnership. Hammond's father made millions of dollars in gold and diamond mines in South Africa and helped fund Tesla's remote control robotic boat. Puharich was friends with Hammond. So Puharich told me that when I was interviewing him, he said, you got to go up to the Hammond Museum. And there's all the letters between Hammond and Tesla. So there's a big giant section in Wizard on Hammond and Tesla. That connection had never been known before. And the reason I found out was because of this far-out medical doctor who had brought Origel to the United States, said that my friend Hammond has gotten a lot of information about Tesla. And that's Hammond's remote control boat, which he showed in 1914, 1915. So the War of the Currents, I'm sure a lot of you know this story, but Edison had direct current. Tesla had invented alternating. He didn't invent alternating current, but he invented the way to harness alternating current. The problem was that electricity, by its nature, changes its direction of flow. So think of a river flowing downstream, then upstream, then downstream and upstream at thousands of times a second. How could you make a water wheel go in one direction? Everyone said it was impossible. So what they did was they created a commutator which removed the upstream. So all you had was the downstream, and that is what direct current is. It's 10% efficient, 90% inefficient. So all you could do, all Edison could do, would be to send electricity 1 mile, power dropping off over distance only for lighting homes. You couldn't run a toaster or a refrigerator. You could just have lighting. If you were close to the source, it would be bright. If you were farther away, it would be dim. Westinghouse had AC, and Elihu Thomson had AC, but they both had commutators. They were just using more AC. They had the same problem. So Westinghouse, even though he was using AC, still the commutator, he could only send electricity 1 mile. Tesla's figured out, after 5 years of study, that if you took 2 circuits out of phase with each other and timed it correctly, you could create a rotating magnetic field. You could create the rotation. You could make that water wheel go in one direction. He removed the commutator. So the difference between DC and AC, with DC you could only send electricity 1 mile for lighting homes, power dropping off over distance. With AC you could send electricity hundreds of miles and you could run factories. It's the difference between a horse and buggy and a rocket ship. That's the difference. But everyone knew Edison's name, so if Edison said we got to go with DC, maybe we should go that way. Morgan was funding Edison, Westinghouse was funding Tesla, and whoever won would win the right to harness Niagara Falls. Had Edison won, all the factories would have been lined up against the falls. He could not have even electrified Buffalo, 20 miles away. That's how primitive the DC system was. So the first goal was to harness the Chicago World's Fair. And you see the Ferris wheel way up there, that's in the Midway. As it turned out, I went to the University of Chicago, and I was living back here. And next to the one building that they kept. I didn't know in 1972 who Tesla was, but I would walk up to the Midway where the Ferris wheel was. I took a course with Bruno Bettelheim on psychoanalysis, and I'd walk back. So later, when I learned about Tesla, I had a whole different feeling about Chicago because I was living right at the site of the Chicago World's Fair, which was morphed into, which became the University of Chicago. Rockefeller helped fund all that. So here we see the Court of Honor, Statue of the Republic. The electrical building is right to the left. On the right is the agricultural building designed by Stanford White. And that's the electrical building. It's a huge building. This building here could seat 80,000 people. And so Tesla appeared at the fair. That's his friend Robert Johnson. And you can see here it says Westinghouse Electric Tesla Polyphase System. They wanted to advertise Tesla's name. Westinghouse wanted to advertise Tesla's name because the Edison people kept suing and kept claiming that it was their invention. Steinmetz was one of the people involved in trying to steal Tesla's apparatus. After they won the battle of the currents, the Tesla motor became known as the Westinghouse motor. So we all know the name Westinghouse. That's one of the key reasons why Tesla's name disappeared. I think about, we all know Stephen Jobs, but who invented the mouse? I don't know. We all know Bausch and Lomb, but who invented contact lenses? I don't know. And that's one of the reasons Tesla's name disappeared. So Tesla, because of the war of the currents, Edison was electrocuting cats and dogs and an elephant and a horse with AC, saying it's too dangerous. Your mother will be Westinghoused if Westinghouse wins this battle. So Tesla figured out how to send electricity through his body to show that AC could be safe. That's Tesla's genius and brilliance. Who would ever think to do something like that? So he would electrify himself with AC to show that it was okay. And here we see two of the people that competed against, three of the people, Marconi, Steinmetz, and Edison. This is a letter that Michael Poopin, who was a fellow Serb who was an enemy of Tesla, wrote when Tesla turned 75. When Tesla turned 75, many Nobel Prize winners sent him a happy birthday. It's weird, but next month I will turn 75. Don't tell me. But I got to read this letter to you. It's just too amazing. The friends of Nikola Tesla are preparing a very graceful compliment for his presented to him on the occasion of his 75th birthday. I have not seen Mr. Tesla for nearly 20 years. In the beginning of the World War, a difference of opinion created a split between Tesla and myself. Neither he nor I have ever had since that time an opportunity to cure that split. In 1915, I offered through a mutual friend to forgive and forget, but somehow the offer was not accepted. I regret, therefore, that under the circumstances, I could not transmit to Mr. Tesla a letter of greetings of congratulations on his 75th birthday. Michael Poopin. What's so amazing about this letter is he says, in 1915, I offered through a mutual friend to forgive and forget. In 1915, there was a lawsuit. Marconi sued Tesla, he sued the US Navy, and he sued Telefunken, and Tesla appeared at the trial, and Poopin spoke at the trial and said the real inventor of the radio was Marconi. So it's so bizarre that Poopin said this. He taught at Columbia University, and unfortunately, they were enemies. On his deathbed, he asked Tesla to come to his hospital bed, and Tesla came, and they made amends. There's a new book out in Princeton University which claims that Tesla does not understand Maxwell's equations. I don't know how Princeton University can produce such a book. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see the calculations in the back?
Yes.
This is just one of many calculations of Tesla's as he's calculating the size of the Earth, how to send. He was a mathematical genius. The guy who wrote that book was faking a lot of the book. Here's a letter from Albert Einstein wishing Tesla a happy birthday on his 75th birthday. And I listed here the other Nobel Prize winners who wished him happy birthday. Röntgen, who, the X-rays, Bragg, Rutherford, Arthur Compton, Millikan, who was a student of Tesla who attended one of his lectures, and Einstein. So these are all Nobel Prize winners wishing Tesla a happy birthday on his 75th birthday. Boyana is here today, who is William Turbo's wife. And this is Bill Turbo here. I took this photograph at the unveiling of the Tesla statue in 2006 on the Canadian side. It's a magnificent statue, and you can see Niagara Falls. So once Niagara Falls was harnessed by Westinghouse through Tesla's inventions, Tesla became world famous. Everybody in the world knew who Tesla was in 1895, and he spoke as the inventor. The same book from Princeton University said that Tesla used illusion to sell the patents to Westinghouse. And I shake my head as to there's still people trying to diminish Tesla's true, incredible genius. Here's his name on the patent plaque. This system is fundamental. It's unchanged today. The entire power grid is based on the rotating magnetic field, which I kind of described to you today, how we remove the commutator. We are living in Tesla's world. Tesla moved into the Waldorf Astoria. He got about $500,000 from Westinghouse, and he owed half of that to his backers, $250,000 in the 1890s. He was essentially a millionaire. And here he used the Waldorf Astoria paper, stationery, and you can see a drawing of trying to send energy from one side of the Earth to the other side of the Earth, just in this one particular drawing. This is Tesla at his height. I love this drawing. It was in the New York Times. So Tesla now returns from Colorado Springs and moves to Long Island to build a wireless system. He's racing against Marconi, and that's the Wardcliffe Tower. The lab was designed by Stanford White. I live in Rhode Island. Stanford White built some of the most beautiful buildings in Rhode Island. He traveled to Rome and Greece and wanted to create, America would be the new world, whatever he'd done, whatever the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks did. So he built these tremendous buildings. He built the towers in Narragansett, he built the Capitol in Providence, Rhode Island, Rosecliff Mansion, and the Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport. So Tesla goes to J.P. Morgan, who's the richest, most powerful man in the world, and Morgan agrees to give Tesla $150,000 to build his wireless system. That's as far as it got on the left, and this is what it was supposed to look back at on the right. Tesla finds out that Marconi has pirated his apparatus. When Tesla had offered the apparatus to Marconi through Sir William Preece, Marconi said, "I don't need it." And then Marconi writes, you know how you build a wireless system? You take a Tesla coil, you do this and that. And it's in a science article, and Tesla freaks out and decides to double the size of the tower. So the tower is supposed to be 90 feet tall. He builds one 180 feet tall. And White is saying, we're going to run out of money. And Tesla says, don't worry, I landed the biggest fish on Wall Street. Everything will be okay. And of course, when Morgan sees that Tesla had doubled the size of the tower, he breached the contract. So Morgan refused to give him additional monies. This was a huge operation. So Tesla's trying to get Morgan to transcend the agreement. So he writes 60 letters between the two of them, and I lay it all out as to what really happened, why Wardenclyffe failed. This is Tesla's words. Let me tell you once more, I have perfected the greatest invention of all time, the transmission of electrical energy without wires to any distance, a work which has consumed 10 years of my life. I'm the only man on this earth today who has the peculiar knowledge and ability to achieve this wonder, and another may not come in 100 years. Help me to complete the work, or else remove the obstacles in my path. I'm like a man swimming against a tide that's carrying me down. May gravitation repel instead of attract. May right become wrong. Every consideration, no matter what it must be, must founder on the rock of your brutal resolve. Is there nothing I can say which will turn you around? Will you let a property of immense value be depreciated simply because you once said no? I tell you I will return your investment 100-fold. What Tesla was envisioning, he didn't totally understand all that would happen. But look at football players are making $60 million. A lineman is making $60 million. Had Morgan believed in Tesla, he would have created cell phone technology in 1906, 1905, in thereabouts. We would have had a world communication system had Morgan believed in Tesla, but Morgan refused to supply the additional funds. In my new book, I discovered, with the help of one of my friends, let me get his name right, Tibor Pandor. This is Henry Clay Frick. Frick is living in the world of Astoria, and Tesla is living in the world of Astoria. Morgan created the first billion-dollar billion-dollar business, which was U.S. Steel. Out of that deal, Frick got $60 million. Tesla is meeting with Henry Clay Frick. Come to Wardenclyffe, and Frick is saying, "Why doesn't Morgan give you the money?" And Tesla says, "He promised me $150,000. He said that was always going to give me. I have to raise the additional funds on my own." This is Tesla's handwriting, where he describes Wardenclyffe. This is a letter to Frick. It's in Frick's papers. Just an amazing document. Frick meets with Morgan, and the deal doesn't go through. Tesla meets with Thomas Fortune Ryan, the deal doesn't go through. Tesla meets with Jacob Schiff, the deal doesn't go through. Morgan blocked him at every turn. So I'm also a handwriting expert, so I looked at Tesla's handwriting over 50, 60 years of his life. This is when he believed in extraterrestrials. This is when he thought he'd receive pulse frequencies from outer space. He's got a little tiny end, like an antenna. This is his graceful signature. And you can see he has a changing self-image. But in 1906, the handwriting just falls right apart. And I hypothesized that he had a nervous breakdown at that time. In 1907, you can see it lost all its verve, lost all its panache. He gets the panache back, but he went through a terrible time. Before my research, everyone thought he floated through that period. He somehow, and no one knew about the real truth. He kept it hidden from O'Neill, who wrote the first biography, who knew him for 40 years. Tesla had to keep a wonderful face on the outside, because if he were to demean J.P. Morgan, he couldn't get funding from other people for all the other ideas that he had. Plus, Morgan had a valid argument. He had breached his contract, but it's a terrible story. So here I took this drawing from H.G. Wells' story, but he goes through tremendous suffering in 1906. In 1984 was the first Tesla conference in Colorado Springs, and I spoke at it, and many other people spoke. Bill Turbo was there, the Coen brothers were there. Toby Groats invited me. I have to thank him. And there's Toby and Bill Turbo and Robert Golka, who built these huge Tesla towers. Golka used to stop by my house all the time here, and gave me a number of important documents. And here you see Golka on the left and Bill Wysock on the right, two great friends. Neither of them are on the planet anymore. But this is the world that I had entered when I got involved with Tesla. I met all these tremendous people. And this is me in 1986 at the Tesla Museum, where I did a lot of research. So Puharich was supposed to speak about brainwaves, that the Russians were controlling our brainwaves. In 1984, he presents the particle beam weapon, the top secret paper of Tesla's. We'd all been searching for this. I had started in 1976, it was 1984. 6 years later, everyone's looking for it. Puharich is the guy who comes through, and the reason he did was Tesla had met during World War II with Ralph Bergstresser, who was working for the Army intelligence, military intelligence, and Tesla gave the secrets of the weapon to the United States government because he wanted to obviously defeat the Nazis. The Nazis were trying to get the weapon from him, and a lot of that is discussed in my new book, Wizard at War. So Puharich had come full circle for me. He'd been this wacky guy. He had a watch, which he said, Puharich told me that UFOs were controlling this watch. He had brought a regalo to the United States, who could bend metal with his mind. And then he had met with Hammond and introduced me to the Hammond Castle and all those letters. And then he brought this particle beam weapon. This is a belt of electrical energy, negative energy. And the cannon is here. And you have little pieces of tungsten. So if the belt is producing a very negative charge, a lot of negative electricity, and you hit a little piece of tungsten that has a negative charge, it'll be repelled out the cannon, and that's how it works. The static electricity machine that you showed us is actually using this concept. So here we see the actual particle beam weapon. I had it drawn with an artist that I worked with, and it, shows up in a lot of sci-fi movies. This was me and Jason Stapleton and Travis Taylor. We did the Tesla Files. We did 5 shows. My book was the basis of a lot of the shows, and I helped write the shows. It's really good. You're partly dealing with Hollywood, and sometimes they repeat things over and over. But overall, I think we did a really good job. This is right here in the building on the top floor. We went to the FBI building, shot in Washington. And we're discussing, trying to uncover the secrets of, what other secrets are there that Tesla has besides the particle beam weapon. This was the ground penetrating radar that we hired to make part of the one segment, the third segment. And you can see that we didn't know for sure what was going on underneath. This is the tower. This goes down 120 feet, and about 70 feet down are 4 giant tunnels. And these are the earth crickers. Tesla wanted to send the energy through the earth. For me, the question is whether or not Tesla was, it was Wardenclyffe a folly because it was never completed. Did he know what he's really talking about? Tesla was hired by Telefunken, the German company, before we got into the war. It was perfectly okay. In fact, Telefunken had all the wireless equipment on U.S. Navy ships, so it was completely okay to be working for the Germans before the wars, before we entered the war. Tesla went on site in Sayville, out on Long Island, and said to them, you must increase the ground connections. You're wasting all your energy sending it through the air. 3 weeks later, they put all that in. They added all this extra stuff. They did exactly what he said. The New York Times reported, Telefunken triples its power, became the most powerful electrical wireless system on the planet. I think that article in the New York Times is the most important article out there to establish that Tesla was indeed knew what he was talking about, because he goes in, he says, guys do X, Y, Z, and Q. They do X, Y, Z, and Q, and they triple their power. Tesla also is the inventor of the Osprey helicopter airplane. If you were to research, just Google it, Tesla's name doesn't show up, but he has a patent in it, and that's how you can establish it. So the military was using a lot of Tesla's ideas. That's his actual patent at the top. And Tesla actually sold the details to Joseph Stalin. After I made the film, I got letters from a fellow from the Soviet Union, gave me declassified documents. Stalin himself had to okay the purchase of the sale. And what Tesla didn't know, fortunately he was too old to go over there, but had he gone to the Soviet Union to help build it, they would have never let him leave the country. What I realized was that Franklin Roosevelt was facing, whoever built the atom bomb first was going to win World War II. but the particle beam weapon might have been the only way to protect us. If the Germans had gotten the atom bomb first and they flew it over to drop it on New York City, maybe we needed Tesla's death ray to shoot down the airplanes. And so I thought that there had to have been information linking Roosevelt to Tesla, and we uncovered that document, which I'll show you in a minute. So Tesla talked about his death ray. And Vannevar Bush, this is a letter that Vannevar Bush, he was the head of the Manhattan Project, called Secret Weapons Development during World War II. He was the dean of MIT. One of his professors was John G. Trump, and most of you know, I think, that Trump read through Tesla's papers and then said, there's nothing, you don't have to worry about these things. And when I uncovered that that's not so, there was other people, General Craigie said, no, we can't let these papers go to Serbia. There's important things in here, we have to keep them. So this is a letter that Vannevar Bush wrote to Tesla in 1931, congratulating him on his 75th birthday. So he obviously knew who Tesla was. The Serbian Museum didn't know who wrote it because they couldn't read the signature. Here's the letter that we uncovered in the making of the Tesla files. It says, I'm writing to the president of Columbia University, Franklin Roosevelt was writing saying, I want the lowdown on Nikola Tesla. Why does he want the lowdown on Nikola Tesla? He wants to know the details of the particle beam weapon because it might be the only way to protect us against the atom bomb should the Germans get the atom bomb and fly it over. And what I discovered in my research, the head of secret weapons development for the Canadian government was General McNaughton, who was third in line to be the head of Allied forces. So you had Eisenhower, Mountbatten, and then this guy. He's on the cover of Time magazine, he's on the cover of Life magazine, he's Winston Churchill's right arm. There's a ton of letters between McNaughton and Nikola Tesla. I cover them all in the new book. Tesla is dealing with the very highest of echelon of power. He's not some old guy in the 1940s, late 1930s, feeding the pigeons, disappearing from history. That's the myth on the outside, but what's happening on the inside, he's negotiating with Joseph Stalin, he's negotiating with General McNaughton, he's negotiating with top officials from Franklin Roosevelt, and Roosevelt himself is interested in who Tesla is. So Tesla, all the way through his life, has continued to grow and fascinate and blow our minds. So here's the actual letter from McNaughton to Tesla saying, we want to come to the Hotel New Yorker, we want to come right here, we want you to tell us the details of your particle beam weapon. We want to protect England against an invasion by the Germans. And that's John Trump, who most of you know happens to be President Trump's uncle. This guy on the left is General Craigie. He was the first military guy to fly, before Tom Cruise, a jet plane. This was a top secret plane during World War II. It was so secret that they put a fake propeller on it when it was sitting, on the station. And Craigie said, no. Trump said, it's nothing in those papers. You don't have to worry about them. Craigie said, no, keep them here. They're too important. So I uncover this battle between these two people. Here we have the railgun. Today's railgun is built on the principles of the particle beam weapon. So I want to read when Tesla got the Edison medal in 1917. This is when they're taking down his tower. He owed money to the Waldorf Astoria, owed $20,000 in back taxes, and they destroy the tower. So this is happening within a couple of weeks of Tesla receiving this award. Ladies and gentlemen, Tesla began, I wish to thank you heartily for your kind appreciation. I am not deceiving myself in the fact of which you must be aware that the speakers have greatly magnified my modest achievements. Inspired with the hope and conviction that this is just the beginning of forerunner of still greater accomplishments, I am determined to continue developing my plans and undertake new endeavors. I am deeply religious at heart and give myself to the constant enjoyment of believing that the greatest mysteries of our being are still to be fathomed. Evidence to the contrary notwithstanding, death itself may not be the termination of this wonderful metamorphosis we witness. In this way, I managed to maintain an undisturbed peace of mind, to make myself proof against adversity, and to achieve contentment and happiness to a point of extracting some satisfaction, even from the darkest side of life, the trials and tribulations of existence. I have fame and untold wealth and more than this, yet how many articles have been written in which I was declared to be an impractical, unsuccessful man, and how many poor, struggling writers have called me a visionary. Such is the folly and short-sightedness of the world. He was just an incredibly great writer, aside from everything else. I took this picture. It's actually not taken from the window, but it's taken from the roof. But what blew my mind was, if you go up into Tesla's room, you can see the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, two of my favorite all-time buildings. The Empire State Building was the site of the original Waldorf Astoria. So when Tesla was sitting in his room looking at the Empire State Building, what was he looking at? He was looking at his past life when he was living the high life in the 1890s, star of the Gilded Age, friends of Mark Twain and Rudyard Kipling, Robert Underwood Johnson and Katherine Johnson, Stanford White, who built Madison Square Garden, J.P. Morgan, Anne Morgan, his daughter, John Jacob Astor, all of that was going through his mind just every morning when he'd wake up and look at the Empire State Building. This is my favorite photo of Tesla. He's sending 500,000 volts through his body. He's whipping a fluorescent light, and he's hit with a strobe. He's into camp. He's into special effects photography. He's so far ahead. He's hip. And he's entered the zeitgeist. So this is my last little quote I want to read here. Because of Elon Musk and Tesla Motors. This is what he wrote in 1904. A cheap and simple pocket-sized, he didn't write pocket-sized, but he was thinking of the phone. A cheap and simple pocket-sized device may then be set up somewhere on sea or land, and it will record the world's news or such special messages as may be intended for it. Thus, the entire Earth will be converted into a huge brain, as it were, capable of response in every one of its parts. Since a single plant of but 100 horsepower can operate hundreds of millions of instruments, the system will have a virtually infinite working capacity. After thanking J.P. Morgan, his architect Stanford White, Tesla ended this amazing article as follows. This work is now far advanced, and though the results may be tardy, they are sure to come. What gets me about this quote, the Earth will be converted into a huge brain, as it were, which is capable of response in every one of its parts. That sentence alone makes this guy a genius. Forget all the things that he's invented. That sentence alone places him in a whole different category to look at what the planet is all about. That's who this guy is. He blows your mind every time you really study him. These are some of the other great pictures, the drawings. He's inspired so many people. He's been on the cover of many stamps. He's on multiple statues. That's me sitting in the Tesla statue that was in Gospic. That statue was destroyed, unfortunately, because the Croats and the Serbs have all these arguments in the 1990s. He's on a 500,000 dinar note. He's on many monies. He's all over the place. Here's Elon Musk and Bono. Spielberg mentioned Tesla recently. This is what Spielberg said at the Kennedy Center. It was in honor of George Lucas. In knowing George Lucas all these years, I've experienced the force. He's a pathfinder like Edison, Bell, and Tesla, and Jobs in the way that everything they touched changed the paradigm. We approached Steven Spielberg in 1990, J.T. Walsh, a friend of mine, well-known actor, and Spielberg looked at who's Tesla? He didn't know who Tesla was. Big Bang, how many of you watch The Big Bang Theory? I love it. He's got Tesla, they're playing that crazy game, we have to guess who it is. The Big Bang Theory is seen by 50 million people. Tesla's picture is on the back wall of almost every single one of those shows. Tesla's re-emerged from total obscurity to being star of our modern age. We went to the United Nations. It's Bill Turbo, Tesla's grandnephew on the left, Lubovitch on the right, who's a great friend and recently passed away, and myself and Mr. Ivanovic, who was the ambassador from Yugoslavia. Our idea was that one way to, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. It's not denominational, it's not religious, so everybody can celebrate it together. Our idea that if the whole world celebrated one thing, we could unify the world. Why not make it Tesla's birthday? And that was the idea. This is the last slide. I'm the guy on the right. I just want to say, this is such an incredible honor for me, and I'm humbled, greatly humbled.
Great pleasure giving life achievement to this wonderful man, old metal. You really deserve it, and you are the best. You are #1. Thank you very much.
Give him a round of applause. He's the man who put all this together.